The trouble started on a crisp October morning when my parents pulled into the cul-de-sac of my quaint suburban home in Willow Creek, a neighborhood governed by the iron fist of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. My name's Ethan Carver, a 32-year-old software developer who'd moved here 2 years prior, lured by the promise of manicured lawns and quiet streets. My parents, Tom and Linda Carver, were visiting from their rural home 3 hours away. Dad, a stern but fair county judge with a penchant for order, and Mom, a retired schoolteacher with a warm smile and a knack for baking pies that could melt even the iciest hearts. They'd brought a cherry pie this time, still warm in its tin, and I could already taste it as I waved from the porch. But before they could even unload their overnight bags, a shadow loomed over their rusty blue pickup truck. Marjorie Henshaw, the HOA president, clipboard in hand, her pinched face radiating authority like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. Marjorie was a wiry woman in her late 50s, with sharp cheekbones and a voice that could curdle milk. She'd been the self-appointed guardian of Willow Creek's bylaws since before I'd arrived, and she wielded the HOA rulebook like a holy text. "Mr. Carver," she barked, not even glancing at me as she zeroed in on my parents, "these individuals are not on the approved visitor list. Per Section 4, Subsection B of the Willow Creek HOA Covenant, all guests must be pre-registered 48 hours in advance. I'll need them to leave immediately." I blinked, caught off guard. "Marjorie, they're my parents. They're just here for the weekend. Surely there's some flexibility." She cut me off with a wave of her hand, her rings glinting in the sunlight. "Rules are rules, Ethan. No exceptions. We've had issues with unauthorized vehicles clogging the streets. Submit the form next time and we'll review it." My dad, still standing by the truck with his hands in his pockets, raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, we're not clogging anything. We're parked in my son's driveway. What's the harm?" Marjorie's lips thinned into a line. "The harm, sir, is that this community thrives on order. If we let one person bend the rules, it's chaos. Please vacate the premises, or I'll have to escalate this." I could see Dad's jaw tighten, the way it did when he was about to lay down the law in his courtroom. Mom put a hand on his arm, whispering, "Tom, let's not make a scene." But the damage was done. Marjorie scribbled something on her clipboard, probably a fine, and marched off, her heels clicking against the pavement like a metronome of doom. I apologized to my parents, mortified, and suggested we try reasoning with her later. But Dad shook his head, his gray eyes narrowing. "Ethan, I've dealt with petty tyrants my whole career. This isn't over." They left that day, pie and all, and I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail, an official HOA notice banning my parents from ever entering Willow Creek again, citing noncompliance with visitor protocols and disruptive behavior. I stared at the paper, my blood boiling. Disruptive behavior? Dad, asking a question? This wasn't just bureaucracy, it was personal. I called Dad that night, expecting him to laugh it off. Instead, his voice was steel. "Ethan, send me that letter. And give me a copy of those HOA bylaws. I want every document they've got." I didn't argue. When Judge Tom Carver got that tone, you complied. Over the next week, I dug through my homeowner paperwork, emailed the HOA for their full records, and mailed everything to Dad. He didn't say much, just thanked me and hung up. I figured he'd file a complaint or maybe write a stern letter of his own. What I didn't expect was for him to dismantle the entire Willow Creek HOA from the ground up. It started quietly. Dad called me a week later, his voice calm, but edged with something I couldn't place. "Ethan, I've been doing some research. That HOA's operating on shaky ground. Their charter's a mess, and they've overstepped their authority more times than I can count. I'm coming back next weekend. With your mother. Tell Marjorie to expect us." I hesitated. "Dad, they'll fine me. Or worse." He chuckled, a rare sound from him. "Let them try. I've got a plan." I didn't know what he meant, but I trusted him. He'd spent 30 years on the bench, handling everything from small claims to felony cases. If anyone could outmaneuver Marjorie Henshaw, it was him. The following Saturday, my parents rolled back into Willow Creek, this time in Dad's old black sedan, less conspicuous than the pickup, but still a statement. I'd barely stepped outside when Marjorie appeared, flanked by two other HOA board members, Carl, a retired accountant with a perpetual frown, and Denise, a yoga instructor who always smelled faintly of lavender. "Ethan," Marjorie snapped, "I see your parents didn't get the memo. This is a violation. We'll be issuing a $500 fine and contacting our attorney." Dad stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back, his judge's demeanor in full effect. "Before you do that, Mrs. Henshaw, I'd like to ask a few questions. You're the president of this HOA, correct?" She nodded, wary. "And you believe you have the legal authority to ban individuals from private property, my son's property, without due process?" Marjorie bristled. "Our bylaws give us that right. This is a private community." Dad smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. "I've read your bylaws. I've also read the state statutes governing HOAs. You might want to sit down with me and discuss this before you dig yourselves any deeper." What followed was a masterclass in legal chess. Dad didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten. He just asked questions. He asked about the HOA's incorporation papers, their tax filings, their meeting minutes. He asked how they justified banning people from private land when their own charter only covered common areas. Marjorie stammered, Carl fidgeted, and Denise looked like she wanted to bolt. Finally, Dad dropped the bomb. "I've filed a motion with the county court to review the Willow Creek HOA's legal standing. I've also requested an injunction to suspend your operations pending investigation. You'll be hearing from my clerk on Monday." Marjorie's face went white. "You can't do that," she sputtered. "I'm a judge, ma'am," Dad said coolly. "I can, and I have." The neighborhood buzzed that week. Word spread fast. Judge Carver was taking on the HOA, and people picked sides. Some, like my neighbor Pete, a gruff mechanic who'd been fined for leaving his toolbox on his porch, cheered Dad on. Others, loyal to Marjorie's vision of pristine perfection, whispered about outsiders meddling in their affairs. I stayed out of it, mostly, just relaying updates between Dad and the growing crowd of curious residents. By Friday, the HOA called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse, a squat brick building with peeling paint and a flickering sign. I went, dragging Pete along for moral support. Marjorie stood at the podium, her voice trembling with indignation. "This is an attack on our community. Judge Carver has no jurisdiction here." But Dad was there too, uninvited, standing at the back in his old gray suit. When she finished, he raised a hand. "May I address the room?" Marjorie hesitated, then nodded, clearly hoping he'd trip over his words. He didn't. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dad began, his voice carrying the weight of a gavel, "I've spent 3 decades upholding the law. I don't take this lightly. But your HOA has abused its power. I've reviewed your records, publicly available, I might add, and found multiple violations. Your board hasn't held a proper election in 5 years. Your fines exceed state limits. And your visitor policy? It's unenforceable. I'm not here to destroy your community. I'm here to save it from a group that's forgotten who they serve." He held up a stack of papers. "This is my petition to dissolve the Willow Creek HOA. If you want to keep it, fix it. But as it stands, it's done." The room erupted. Pete hooped, others shouted objections, and Marjorie looked like she might faint. Dad just stood there, calm as ever, while I marveled at how he'd turned a petty dispute into a reckoning. The court hearing came 2 weeks later, a packed session in Dad's own courthouse. Marjorie hired a lawyer, a slick guy named Victor, who argued that the HOA's autonomy was sacrosanct. Dad, representing himself and me as a resident, dismantled their case piece by piece. He presented evidence, missing financial reports, forged signatures on old minutes, even a photo of Marjorie's husband parking his RV on their lawn, against HOA rules, of course. The hypocrisy drew gasps from the gallery. When Victor tried to object, Dad cited precedent after precedent, his voice steady and commanding. The other judge, a colleague of Dad's named Judge Hargrove, listened intently, occasionally nodding. In the end, Hargrove ruled in Dad's favor. The Willow Creek HOA has operated outside its legal bounds, he declared. Its charter is hereby revoked. Residents may form a new association if they wish, under proper oversight. Bang went the gavel, and just like that, the HOA was gone. Marjorie resigned from the neighborhood in disgrace, selling her house and moving away within a month. Carl and Denise faded into the background, and Willow Creek settled into a strange, liberating chaos. No more fines for unmowed grass or unapproved paint colors. No more clipboard-wielding enforcers. My parents visited the next weekend, pie in tow, and this time, no one stopped them. We sat on my porch, the three of us, watching the sun set over a freer neighborhood. "You didn't have to go that far, Dad," I said, half joking. He took a sip of coffee, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Ethan, when someone tries to keep my family apart over a rulebook, they've picked the wrong fight." "Besides," he added with a grin, "it was kind of fun." Mom laughed, and I did too, realizing that Judge Tom Carver hadn't just banned the HOA. He'd reminded us all what justice really meant.